Lots to digest then. With us in the studio, the former permanent Under-Secretary and head of the Diplomatic Service at the Foreign Office, that's Lord Simon McDonald, and Cillian Fox, who served as Defence Secretary and then Trade Secretary as well. Plus, we've got Sarina Barker-Singh, our political correspondent, here with us as well. Right, let's dissect it, shall we? Lord Simon McDonald, first, to you. How do you think Number 10 will have reacted to that? Did it go as they wanted?
They'll be very pleased. I think they couldn't have written a better script themselves. It's always good to come bearing gifts to President Trump, and the Prime Minister had the best gift, the best invitation, and not only the possibility, he brought the Manu Regia. Normally this is at the very end of the process, but clearly for this theatrical gesture, things were speeded up, and so there was an actual physical prop, and you could see how the President enjoyed that.
Yeah, and then obviously the defence spending boost as well, perfectly timed just before the trip. Liam, what did you make of it?
I think it went as well as anyone might have expected. I think given the closeness of the United States and the United Kingdom in things like defence and security, intelligence, there is such a strong base there. And that, of course, is the core of the special relationship. But some very interesting things came out of it. I thought that the most interesting for me was the President saying we might try to get Ukraine some of the territory back that they had lost. I think that will have raised a few cheers in, I would have thought, in Kyiv and a few worries in Moscow.
Yeah, that's interesting that as well, because it's kind of counterintuitive as well. It's not really what we've been hearing him say before as well.
I thought it was also interesting on trade. He couldn't have emphasised more that Britain and the EU were not the same. Were not the same case. He went, I think, out of his way to make that point on a number of occasions. And you know, when I think it's pointed out to him that the VAT issue, which still seems to come up, is not real because VAT is applied to UK domestically manufactured products as well as imports. So it cannot in any way be regarded as a tariff or a trade barrier. I think that when that is taken off the table, you suddenly find that it's easier to get an agreement on trade.
Yeah, and we've been speaking so much about security, but the economics of this are so important as well. And Simon, on the Chagos Islands as well, that will be a bit of a relief, although you perhaps suspect with these things that they may have known before, would you say?
I think the British government has been working very hard. It started, of course, under the previous government, although David Cameron was less happy with the policy than James Cleverly. It's been a priority for Keir Starmer's government in its first few months. It looked a bit wobbly, but the President didn't say, I'm agreeing this, but he gave a very broad, positive welcome.
Yeah.
So I think in the talks now going on, that is probably being nailed down.
Yeah, inclined to go along with your country. I mean, will that silence some of his Conservatives' critics, do you think, Liam?
No. Inclined to go along can mean a lot of things. And I think that he did refer on a number of occasions to the senior American military figures. And I think that they will have a fair bit to say on what inclined to go along will ultimately mean.
Watch the space. Sarina, what did you make of it?
Well, I think you just get a sense of how much detail you can get from those bilats, which you don't get with other Prime Ministers usually. It was almost like a summary of each little item and where the direction of travel was going on that. So Chagos, we're completely in a different direction than what we thought. Also, he gave detail about a 100-year lease, which I think is new. We were expecting like a 99-year lease. So you can see the parameters of these deals changing slightly. There's also this idea of a US backstop, which is the big chunky thing that Keir Starmer wants to come away with. And you can see Donald Trump sort of tying it to the minerals deals. And obviously Zelensky is going to be there this week as well, so he will have to sign off things as well. But you can sort of see the direction of travel. I think journalists in the room will notice that it was extremely warm words, much more warm tone in terms of how the two men are getting on than we expected, perhaps. It was almost like Donald Trump was trying to convince us that they were great friends. He said we'd met many times. He said he loved his beautiful wife.
Yeah, that was quite a moment. What I thought, I have to say,
yeah,
only Donald Trump would say that, right?
But it's very confusing because usually Downing Street has been trying to convince us that they are on great terms. They had this kind of strange relationship over whether they'd campaigned or their staffers had campaigned for Kamala Kamala during the presidential election. That seems to now have been completely reversed, and Donald Trump is now trying to convince us that they're great friends, which I think his team will be very, very happy with.
Yeah.
We've seen that so many times before, though, when the special relationship is questioned because you've got a Labour Prime Minister and a Republican President, or you've got a Conservative Prime Minister. Ultimately, the special relationship and its value to our mutual security is too important to be owned on either side of the Atlantic by one party or another. And it's too important for the personal chemistry between leaders to get in the way. And so many times we've seen the stories being written about the special relationship in peril because of political differences, whatever. Very quickly, reality takes over. And the importance of the relationship itself becomes paramount.
I think because it is this intangible thing, both the leaders are trying to prove that it exists. It's almost, you have to keep talking about the special relationship, otherwise what does it really mean? So I think that letter did sort of help in terms of having a physical prompt. You could see that they'd done their homework on what Donald Trump really prioritises with the royal family. And they'd kind of prepared for that. But yeah, I think special relationship is something that we'll keep talking about.
I just want to go to Washington now because we can now bring in the Republican strategist and former Trump US State Department appointee Matthew Bartlett. Always good to get the view from Washington. How do you think that press conference went? Here in the studio, we seem to be agreeing that Keir Starmer will be pretty happy with it.
Yeah, good to join you across the pond. And how did it go? I would say it went swimmingly. These are two presidents and prime ministers, people in power from different parties and certainly different personalities. But you would not know that today. There seemed to be a genuine affection for each other, for each other's country, agreement on policies. There was all smiles in the Oval Office. And again, around a very contentious time, which is peace in Ukraine. So yes, we've seen the special relationship clearly enduring to this day, and certainly will beyond that. But we also have a press conference coming up. Anything can happen with a predictably unpredictable President Trump.
Yeah, don't count your chickens just yet. You mentioned the agreement on policy, and there will be two parts of policy that Downing Street will be really, really hoping that Donald Trump means it when he sounds warm on it. Firstly is the Chagos Islands, where he said he was inclined to go along with Britain, and also on tariffs, because Donald Trump was very clear saying that he thinks it's a bad deal for the US when it comes to the EU, but maybe slightly different for the UK, he implied. How solid do you think both of those things are?
These it is clearly important that they were raised, but I would not say that either are cemented as policy moving forward. Donald Trump oftentimes likes to dangle something out there, even distract with certain things. And certainly when it comes to tariffs, it seems as if the threat of tariffs are much more powerful to him than imposing them. Beyond that, yes, as you said, this is a Donald Trump that says America first, but America not alone, and also recognizes the notion of each country being great in their own way, national sovereignty issues. So the fact that the UK, there may be a little bit of daylight and separation between the EU, we are British, we are not merely Europeans, I think is not lost on the president and certainly appreciated with by President Trump. And that may result in, preferential treatment when it comes to economic policies.
Yeah, that's very interesting to say that they're not perhaps cemented. The other thing I wanted to ask you is we've had two European leaders visit the White House and meet Donald Trump this week. Obviously, President Macron went earlier on this week, kind of getting in there first, but now, of course, we've seen Keir Starmer. And I know we haven't had the press conference yet, but on the basis of where we are now, who do you think had the warmest reception?
It's interesting. I would say that President Trump likes to, sometimes play there's good cop, there's bad cop, and sometimes President Trump likes to play the role of crazy cop, making affinity for President Putin, and then making outrageous and outlandish comments towards President Zelensky, who will be here tomorrow. I would say both leaders from France to the UK, have been really, really well received, not just by the president, but by the American public. There was a poll out today that asked Americans, who is our top ally? But by far, it was the UK. So that is present in the Oval Office. That is present in the coverage of the Prime Minister's visit, and that is such an enduring relationship. Who had it better, Macron or Starmer? I'll let you be the judge, but both did equally well. But it's a great day for U.S.-UK relations here in Washington today.
Yeah, and just finally, this is something that Number 10 will have been preparing for months, and we've seen Keir Starmer and members of the cabinet as well being so careful in what they're saying in relation to the US, like that relationship, obviously something that they're so keen to preserve. How do you think they've done so far, keeping Donald Trump on side?
I'm skeptical, that this is a management issue with President Trump. These are very, very serious issues, and this is a horrific war caused by Vladimir Putin. So now we're doing what is even more difficult, trying to get together leaders of a coalition. We've had U.S.-UK relations that unfortunately led to a very misguided war. We are now trying to have U.S.-UK relations lead to a lasting peace. And we certainly don't want it to be a misguided peace. So yes, the Prime Minister is coming with his own defense increases in spending, proposals for troops on the ground. This is about finding common ground, authenticity, representing his people, the goodwill of the world, standing firm on his principles, and understanding with allies. So again, these are very important details that will absolutely lead to whether or not the outcomes are positive for the world. And it seems as if the Prime Minister again has had just a phenomenal start. Whether it was his announcements prior last night, he was feted among Washington, and a wonderful meeting in the Oval Office. We have a press conference, but again, a tremendous diplomatic tight walk and reaching agreement on a personal level, even with the return of the American president, Donald Trump.
OK, thank you. It's been really interesting to talk to you and get your perspective. Matthew Bartlett there, thank you. Right, let's chat to our guests again, shall we? A phenomenal start. Simon, do you agree?
Yes. But it's only halfway through. And as the American commentators said, Donald Trump is an unpredictable character. So the content of the press conference is a separate event. But the start couldn't have been better. And sometimes the course is set and everything just follows the same pattern. And I'm sure that's the hope in Number 10 right now.
I was really struck by Matthew Bartlett saying that neither tariffs nor Chagos is cemented, echoing really what you were saying on Chagos as well. And when it comes to policy, it feels like the one thing that Keir Starmer went to Washington determined to try and secure was that US backstop when it comes to Ukraine, that kind of security guarantee. How important do you think that is for the UK?
Well, I think you need to begin by understanding that what politicians normally like predictability and diplomats like predictability. Donald Trump likes to be disruptive. It's an entirely different way of doing things. And so things remain very fluid until very late in a process. And I guess that we'll not really know very much more till President Zelensky's been and where we see the broader coalition coming around on that. I mean, he has been very successful, Donald Trump, in achieving what he wanted, which was Europe to do more for their own defence. Europeans should have taken the hint the first time. In the first Trump administration, they didn't.
Is that a bit of an acknowledgement that your party, the Conservatives, didn't do enough when it comes to defence spending?
Well, no. Look at Britain is way ahead. Some of our European partners, Spain 1.28%, Italy 1.4%, France barely reaching 2%. The problem has been that the Americans, now bipartisan, take the view that, yes, of course we want to play our role in NATO, but European countries in NATO can't expect America to pay for European security, the security of the Americas, the Middle East and Asia, and that Europe's got to do more of its own in the heavy lifting there. So I think he's achieved that, actually. He's now got that debate really moving in Europe. The question will be now how he deals with the Russian side. And again, I thought the most interesting thing was, yes, we'll want to talk about how we can get some of Ukraine's territory back. That was for me the moment that I find most stunning of the conversation. But where that actually is, as people say, take everything President Trump says seriously, not necessarily literally.
And Simon, as someone who used to work in the Foreign Office, it feels like over the last few weeks, all of the alliances, the institutions, the consensus internationally, geopolitically, is now up for grabs, right? Everyone's trying to work out the place in the world, US, Europe, Russia, China. What kind of conversations do you think are going to be going on in the Foreign Office?
The 20th of January, Inauguration Day, was a watershed, I think, in world history, that everything, as you say, is up for grabs. So I think that the conversations in private are thinking the unthinkable. What happens if things shift fundamentally? One of the achievements of the first Trump administration was to get most European countries to increase their defence spend, not as much as the Americans would like, but 23 NATO allies are now over the 2% mark. The question for this administration is, how long will the US be around? And so Europe not only spending more, but being more capable of looking after its own defences. And that is a conversation that really didn't happen in my 38-year career, because the Americans were always reliably there.
Do you think that we and the rest of Europe took that for granted a bit?
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. I guess you'd agree with that.
Totally. And for a long time. And this is not a new issue. I remember being with Robert Gates, the American Defence Secretary, and we used to have this routine, we used to call it bad cop and worse cop, and he would say, Europeans are not spending enough money, and then I would say, and sooner or later, you will get an administration that will not allow American taxpayers to be taken for a ride. And that's 15 years ago, as you say, Simon. This conversation has been ongoing.
But now happening before our eyes.
It is, and it's wonderful that it's happening before our eyes, because it sends a message to people like Putin that it may be a little awkward process, but we're getting to a consensus that this is a more dangerous world and we all have to spend more on the security of our nations and their people. And that's a good place for us to be.
I mean, look, Number 10 have been scrambling, haven't they, to find this money for the increased defence spending, looking at the aid budget, for example. How important do you think it was to get that over the line before this meeting?
I think they've clearly done their homework. That was clearly a big deal. They can point to it and say, look what we've done for you, look what we've brought. But he's done his homework in a lot of respects, with the letter, with the Chagos deal, Lammy's comment saying that they would, publicly saying they would allow the US to have a say on that. So I think that was a pretty big deal. I think also hearing from Downing Street, they were scrambling a bit. Not everyone seemed to know that was happening. So I think it did come down to the wire. But I think also with these diplomatic the strategy, it's about what's next. As you say, Trump is so unpredictable. They have done their homework now. They have brought that great deal. But what happens when he changes his mind? What happens if he says he's not minded to follow the Chagos deal? I think that's when we'll see the making of Keir Starmer as the diplomat and how he deals with those kind of changes.
Simon, I know you've got to dash in a minute, but it's been great to have your thoughts so far on the programme. But just before you go, how do you think Keir Starmer compares with this relationship with Donald Trump compared to previous prime ministers?
It's still early days. I think he is not the same character as his predecessors. I think of his predecessors, the one who seemed personally most attuned to Donald Trump was Boris Johnson. So that personal element, that personal warmth maybe will never be there. But I think even after two encounters, one in September in New York, one today in Washington, Keir Starmer can say, I'm doing better than either Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss.
Interesting. I always also remember that slightly awkward walk with Theresa May as well, the kind of handhold moment in which
also true.
I'm not sure if I'll ever kind of recover from the...
President Macron might say the same.
Yeah, that's true. It's a very good point. Simon, thank you very much indeed. So from what we learned so far while the pair was speaking in front of the cameras, well, firstly, the Prime Minister had clearly prepared his own made-for-TV moment to try and get the President on side. He'd gone into the White House with a letter, an invite for a state visit to the UK from King Charles, no less, and also requested an immediate response from Mr Trump. Let's have a look.
It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman, a great, great gentleman. Oh, that's well. Well, that is really nice. I must make sure his signature's on that. Otherwise, it's not quite as meaningful. It is, and that's quite a signature, isn't it? Beautiful. He's a beautiful man, a wonderful man, and we appreciate it. I've known him, gotten to know him very well, actually. First term and now second term. Perhaps you'd like to say what that very important paragraph.
Yes, so this is a letter from His Majesty the King. It's an invitation for a second state visit. This is really special. This has never happened before. This is unprecedented. And I think that just symbolises the strength of the relationship between us. So this is a very special letter. I think the last state visit was a tremendous success.
It was.
His Majesty the King wants to make this even better than that. So this is truly historic, an unprecedented second
That's a
state
great-
visit, and he
great
wants
honour.
to talk that through with you.
And that says at Windsor. That's
Yes.
really something.
Yes. What I haven't got yet is your answer.
Yeah.
I do need to.
The answer is yes. On behalf of our wonderful First Lady, Melania, and myself, the answer is yes, and we look forward to being there and honoring the King and honoring really your country. Your country is a fantastic country, and it'll be our honor to be there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. I shall happily take that back to His Majesty.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nothing like a bit of soft power from the royal family. Is there? It goes down well with Donald Trump as well, right? A beautiful man, he says,
right.
King Charles is.
Yes, I think also he flipped the letter to the cameras, so I think there's fun to be had with zooming in to exactly what King Charles did say to him.
Yeah, but it's definitely really important, isn't it, the soft power that the royal family bring to somebody like Donald Trump. We know, of course, his affection for the late Queen Elizabeth, but he did seem pretty happy with this one as well, right?
He's also got strong links with the UK, particularly in Scotland, you know, where he's got these very strong links and where he still talks about his family coming from there. So it's not a small thing for him. And I was at that the banquet at the last state visit, and the President clearly loved it, as did his family. And so it's a great card for the UK to be able to play. You know, having a dinner at Versailles is not quite the same as a state visit to the UK, is it?
Yeah, it is a card that they're obviously very keen to play as well. You were pointing out that it's the first time that he has a second state visit, but the first time under King Charles.
It is. And so I think that, you know, it wraps up two different things. It's the King's first ability to host the President, and for the President, he gets two state visits. So it's a win-win.
Do you think Sadiq Khan will be well behaved this time? I remember the last time London Mayor was on the protest, wasn't he?
Well, the Foreign Secretary also had different views back then. But I think the state visit is interesting. I think it will be probably more Trump-focused, perhaps in Balmoral, probably tie into his golf course and a bit more tailored in that way, which will be interesting.
Yeah. There was so much choreography here, right? The invite to the state visit, for example, you know, the warm words on either side. But you were just pointing out, weren't you, Liam, that the one subject that they didn't touch on was the Middle East.
Surprising that we got questions on a lot of peripheral stuff from the media there. No one really touched on.
Is that what you'd have asked then if you were in the room?
Well, in the Middle East, no, I think that what Donald Trump has done is to make it very clear to everybody that we're not returning to the status quo ante, that the idea that we would just simply go back to where we were pre the 7th of October, it's not going to happen. Exactly what will happen is, of course, less clear. But I think that it's made people in the region, and you know, I spend a lot of time there with the Abraham Accords grouping. It's made people there realise they have to think the unthinkable, and that they need to consider a whole wide range of options about how the situation in the wider Middle East may play out. And we've got a lot of concern in America, which is not always reflected here or reported here, about Iran and Iran's role. One of the reasons I think the President will want to see resolution of the Ukrainian conflict is that, unlike at the end of his last term, Iran and Russia have developed a closeness which is actually resulting in a swap of ballistic missile technology from Russia to Iran, which clearly poses a threat to America's and Britain's other allies in the region. So it's a very sensitive subject, which, and I think that America, I think that this administration will want to deal more firmly with Iran than the Biden administration.
It's interesting as well, though, because some of Donald Trump's most incendiary comments recently have been on Gaza, right? Saying that America wants to take over Gaza, posting an AI video of Trump hotels, him on the beach with Netanyahu. It's obviously seems something that Keir Starmer just doesn't want to get into. I guess you can only fight on certain fronts when you have to choose your battles.
Well, I think you have to differentiate between what the President says and taking it too literally. But what he is saying very clearly is whatever happens in the future will be different from what was there before. And everybody is going to have to think out of the box in terms of the solutions that we have. My own view is that the Abraham Accords was the greatest diplomatic triumph of the first Trump administration. He'll be very keen to see that progress. But frankly, unless you get a tangible benefit on the Arab street, then it's going to have a limited lifespan. So there'll be a lot of attention from America's allies in the Gulf and in the wider Middle East to see that happen. And I think that would be a super legacy for the second administration.
Well, we are still awaiting the news conference between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer. It was due to start at 7 p.m, but of course that kind of freewheeling fireside chat in the Oval Office has delayed things. As soon as it comes, as soon as we get the picture, we'll bring it to you. But in the meantime, the President remained a bit more tight-lipped, shall we say, on any kind of peacekeeping force in Ukraine. He said there needs to be a deal first.
But I have to say this, as I said yesterday, you know, you're talking about a peacekeeping force. We have to make a deal first. Right now, we don't have a deal. We have Russia, we have Ukraine. I think we're very well advanced. I think Russia has been acting very well. We have Representatives Steve Witkoff and Scott and Marco and JD. We're all involved, every one of us, and a lot more. But I think we're very well advanced on a deal, but we have not made a deal yet. So I don't like to talk about peacekeeping until we have a deal.
Well, the President also responded to a question about him describing the Ukrainian President Zelensky as a dictator, while Keir Starmer described Vladimir Putin as one.
The relationship between President Zelensky and President Putin is not a good one. You've noticed, right? It's not a good one. It's not a good relationship. And we're going to have to try and work something out. Sometimes that happens. I get along with both. I have a very good relationship with President Putin. I think I have a very good relationship with President Zelensky. And now we're doing the deal, and we're going to be in there. We're going to be actually in there and digging our hearts out. And hopefully, we need the rare earth, and we have some here, but we don't have enough. Our economy is very strong, and we need a lot of things that, in some cases, we don't have here. So I think we're going to have a very good relationship, but the relationship between them is not the best.
Mr. President, do you still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
I can't believe I said that. There you go. Things you just did not expect to hear in press conferences. The President was asked earlier if a deal to end the war in Ukraine would involve an exchange of territory.
Yeah, there are a lot of areas that were taken. Yeah, we've talked about it. A lot of the sea line has been taken. And we'll be talking about that. And we're going to see if we can get it back, or get a lot of it back for Ukraine, if that's possible. We'll be seeing about that, okay?
Now, while the meeting was generally friendly, there was a Macron-style moment, you might say, when Keir Starmer corrected the President on the amount of money given to Ukraine.
It maybe got a little bit testy because we wanted to have a little bit of what the European nations said. You know, they get their money back by giving money. We don't get the money back. Biden made a deal. He put in $350 billion. And I thought it was a very unfair situation.
We're not getting all of ours. I mean, quite a bit of ours was gifted. It was given. There were some loans, but mainly it was gifted, actually.
Right, let's chat again, shall we, to Serena and Liam. I mean, it's remarkable. Just playing those exchanges like that, it is quite remarkable. The point that you picked up earlier about the territory in Ukraine feels really important, but it is just worth stepping back and reflecting on how extraordinary it is to hear a president of the US saying he has a great relationship with Vladimir Putin.
Well, we've been here before, remember, when President Obama had the so-called reset with Russia. Russia invades Georgia, and rather than punishing Russia, we get a reset. That didn't end well because soon after, Russia annexed Crimea, then it invades Ukraine. And I think that while it's entirely understandable that people want Putin to take a different direction, remember who Putin is. Putin has murdered his political opponents at home. He's murdered dissidents abroad, including in the United Kingdom. He's got no respect for either human rights or human life, it appears. He's a serial offender. And what we saw was a failure of deterrence by the West. We didn't react properly under the Obama administration to Georgia. We didn't respond properly to Crimea, and therefore you get a repeated pattern of behaviour. It's entirely understandable that people would want to see change in Putin. I think Putin is a very evil man, and I think that that behaviour is not going to change. Now, whether, given the situation in Russia, where the Russian economy is being hit very hard and they've had 750,000 casualties, even Putin can't take that indefinitely. So there is an incentive for Russia to want, I think, to see this come to an end if they can save face in doing so. And that's what I think the president will be trying to lever. He's a very transactional politician. You know, we're giving huge amounts in terms of military aid to Ukraine. So what are we getting back? That's the rare earths. That's very much the Trump style. And there was just a hint there that if we're going to help end this conflict, what is Russia going to give back? I thought that was what I took as the hint from that.
That's interesting. And what do you make of this, the minerals deal? Because that's the other thing that really struck me when he's saying, oh, we're going to be digging in Ukraine, they got a lot of things that we need as America. What's your reflections on this?
That's the nature of the way Donald Trump does business. Yes, America is the biggest military power in the world. Remember, the American military budget is bigger than the next 10 combined. And we're willing to give you aid, but what will we get back as a result?
It's quite, I guess, some people will be looking at that thinking Ukraine is a country on its knees after a war, and Donald Trump is saying that he's going to go in there and start taking their minerals away.
Well, remember the message this is also sending to Moscow, which is, by the way, we're not abandoning Ukraine. In fact, it looks like we're going to deepen that relationship by creating that interdependence. They supply us with this, we can supply them with weapons on a relatively indefinite basis. So there's also a message to Putin. Again, this is very much the Donald Trump style, which is highly disruptive, unpredictable, but ultimately quite transactional.
Yeah, the transactional thing is really key, isn't it? It's very interesting, it really is. Serena, when it comes to Ukraine, it's such a big deal for the UK and for Keir Starmer as well, obviously going into this, because although Donald Trump was very clear saying, look, we're not talking about peacekeeping now, we've got to talk about the deal first. If it is Britain who is going to be providing such a big part of any potential peacekeeping troops, and that is something that they need to start thinking about now, right?
Yeah, I think this is obviously stakes are high on this. The pressure is on for Keir Starmer, but I think the rewards are also great. Boris Johnson, a huge part of his premiership was aligned to this issue on Ukraine, the big personal connection with Zelensky, that he was one of the first to go out there and personally meet him. I think Keir Starmer and his team know that there is opportunity for this idea of a statesman-like image, especially when he's doing so badly in the polls. They've also got reform on their heels in certain seats that they're not perhaps showing strength on security and defence issues. This is an opportunity to make gains in those areas. So I think this is not only a morality issue for Keir Starmer personally, but it's also a chance and an opportunity to galvanise his party. I would also say, though, on the foreign policy issue, there is almost a trap here, though, that Liam kind of alluded to, that there was no talk of the Israel-Gaza issue, and that's a huge problem for the Labour Party. It's caused great schisms in the party, but also lost them huge amounts of seats. I wonder if he takes up this rhetoric of diplomacy and whether that strays into other areas, what that means for the Labour Party, because they don't really have a cohesive argument or around it anymore, and we know that Keir Starmer personally suffered for some of comments previously, and I don't think they want to be dragged into that debate again.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. Well, we are still awaiting the news conference between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer. Don't go anywhere, because as soon as it happens, we'll bring it to you. And if that fireside chat was anything to go by, it is going to be absolutely chocker with news lines, because we learn an awful lot from that conversation. Let's go now to the White House. We can talk to our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who's been digesting the conversation so far that we've heard between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump. What are your reflections, Mark?
I think, as your previous contributors said, my sense is that Number 10 will be pleased with this. I mean, it does feel like Donald Trump was in a good mood. He seemed to be enjoying it, and Keir Starmer seemed to be dealing with what could have been an incredibly unpredictable half hour, as it was in the end, in the Oval Office, with the cameras rolling, with the reporters there asking whatever questions they may. It could have gone any way, frankly. And I think at the end of the day, and the day is not yet ended, there's still the awkward issue of the news conference to come. But I think at the moment, as things stand at 20 to 3 in the afternoon here, things are going well. But just the very fact we have to say that gives you a sense of how tricky this moment is, how it's not like all the many meetings between American presidents and British prime ministers in years, decades gone by. This is different, and it's being handled differently. It's being handled really very carefully indeed. Look, we saw the way that Emmanuel Macron chose to deal with things at the beginning of the week, the kind of bromance that they had, the tactile relationship that between those two men. There were hugs, there were kind of almost high fives, awkward in a sort of fawning way, the handshakes between them. There was none of that really this time, but there was a warmth between the two men, which I think in today's transatlantic diplomacy, that warmth is all important, and the relationship, the singular relationship between Trump and whoever's sitting in that other armchair in the Oval Office is all important. And we saw, for example, how awkward it was a couple of weeks ago with the president and the King of Jordan, because the details of that moment were so different from this, and it was so unbelievably awkward. You could feel the awkwardness there. There was none of that this time. And on trade, the mood music was positive. On Ukraine, it was positive as well, at least for now. But, you know, what will it be like in 24 hours' time? We don't know. But if Keir Starmer was Europe's representative in Washington for one day only, for today, then I think he did Europe a good service, I think, is how European capitals will see this. I was struck, too, at a couple of other observations that just sort of get to the heart of the Trump presidency. It's also broad brush. There is, and it changes so quickly. And behind the curtain, you wonder how much is actually there. I mean, at one point, Donald Trump was asked about AUKUS, that is the key defence pact between the UK, the US and Australia. I mean, it's a pivotal defence treaty that was signed quite some years ago now. And he was asked by one of the journalists about AUKUS, and he said, "What's AUKUS?" I mean, maybe he misheard. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt, if you like. Maybe he didn't hear the question. But it almost sounded like he didn't actually know what AUKUS was. And you can almost believe that because of the orbit that the current American president operates in. Those details of defence pacts, they're kind of all beneath him. But that gives you a sense of this American president and how he is so fundamentally different from all those that went before.
You see, this is the thing, isn't it, Mark? Because you were saying there about how tangible these things are, particularly on the policies, because the mood music, as you say, was very positive on a lot of these very controversial issues. Tariffs, for example, Chagos, Ukraine, but then he didn't exactly confirm any of them. So how sure can number 10 be that Donald Trump's mood music is actually going to be followed through when it comes to the concrete policy that they're so keen to secure?
As sure as the day is long, I think, and no longer. And that's the problem. But I think, providing Donald Trump with exactly what he wants, meeting him where he is what it's all about. And that moment at the very beginning where Britain kind of played the trump card to Trump and the Prime Minister pulled out of his pocket that invitation from King Charles for a state visit. Trump loved that. I mean, you could see it on his face. He absolutely loved that. He wanted to look through to the second page to check it was signed like the businessman that he is. And indeed, the royal signature was there. And he wanted to keep the letter. Of course he did. I mean, those sort of little moments, I think, they mean a lot to Donald Trump, and in a relationship and with a president who is transactional, who can be pretty volatile. These little things can go a long way. Look, we wondered whether there would be any awkward moments or difficult moments between the two men during the Oval Office meeting. I don't think there were. I mean, if there was any awkwardness, it was kind of the fawning nature with which Keir Starmer handed that royal invitation to the president. He was beyond effusive in how unprecedented it was to get two state invitations, one after the other. Of course, he had a state visit to the UK in his first presidency with Queen Elizabeth, but that went down well, and I think these little wins are what diplomacy is all about right now.
Yeah, they absolutely are. Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone there for us in Washington. Well, our very own Beth Rippey was in the Oval Office a short time ago. Mr. Trump spoke to her about potential tariffs on the EU.
Mr. President, you obviously can do business with our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. You said yesterday that the EU was constructed to screw the US when it comes to trade. What can our Prime Minister say to you to persuade you not to impose tariffs on the United Kingdom?
Yeah, did I use the word that you said, that bad word?
I think so. I'm sorry to repeat.
Well, I think that the EU, I've had problems with the EU because, and we're not talking about, we happen to have a great relationship with you, but we do have problems with the EU because they've tariffed us. They do it in the form of a VAT tax, which is about 20%, and many other taxes. They sue our companies. They sued Apple, got $16 or $17 billion, which was, I think, totally a ridiculous decision. And they're suing Google for a lot of money. They're suing a lot of other companies, and we don't like the way they're treating our people now. We don't like the way they're treating our companies. They sell us cars. We don't sell them cars. They don't take our cars. They don't take much of our agriculture. And we have a deficit with them of about $350 billion. So I wouldn't say it's been such a great relationship personally, but other people did because it's politically correct to say that it's been good, but it hasn't been good. And we're going to change that. And we are going to have reciprocal tariffs. We're not going to have tariffs. We're going to have reciprocal. Whatever they charge us, we're going to charge them, which for many years, foolishly, I would have done that, but then all of a sudden we had COVID and we had other things to think about. So it took me a little while to get that on, but we had, in my first 4 years, we had the greatest economy in the history of, I think, the world, but certainly in the history of our country. I think we're going to have that again. But the EU was very, very tough on us from the standpoint of trade. Then you could take it a step further and go into NATO. And that was a very tough situation for us. I mean, that's been a very tough situation because we were paying a disproportionate share, and it wasn't good. So, as you know, they paid hundreds of billions of dollars after I got involved, and they evened it out a little bit, but not very much. And then if you look at the war, we're in for $300 billion plus, and they're in for $100 billion. They get their money back, and now we'll get our money back also. But under Biden, you wouldn't have done that. Biden did a terrible job, I have to say. I hate to say that about somebody that sat here just before me, but he did a terrible, terrible job. That war should have never happened, the war between Russia and Ukraine. Frankly, October 7th should have never happened. Israel, that should have never happened. What happened there should have never. Inflation should have never happened. Afghanistan should have never happened. The way they got out, not getting out, but the way they got out. So, but I can say that as far as we're here for a different reason, we're talking about a very different place. And this is some place that I have investments there. I own Turnberry, I own Aberdeen, and I own a great place called Doonbeg in Ireland. So, you know, I have a great warm spot for your country.
And our trade, obviously, is fair and balanced, and in fact, you've got a bit of a surplus, so we're in a different position there. And obviously, we contributed hugely in relation to Ukraine, and taken together with Europe, there's about 50%
It'll
of what's
work,
gone
yeah.
in.
It'll work. It's going to work.
Well, we are really now on the countdown to that news conference, but he will be pretty pleased with that, Keir Starmer.
He'll be pleased with everything. The devil's in the detail. America thinks they've got a trade surplus with the UK. We think we've got a trade surplus with the US. We measure them slightly different. Makes us a much easier place than the EU to come to an agreement. I think that when they look at the Chagos thing, and if it's true that the money to pay for the Chagos deal is going to come from the defence budget, that may not be such a big plus with the senior military figures in the US.
And really, the tariffs and the trade is all important, isn't it? But I guess after all that work, Serena, after all the planning, so far, touch wood, they'll be pleased.
I think they will be pleased. I think the EU point is interesting because Sir Keir Starmer was quite silent when Donald Trump had that tirade on it. I'm not sure Macron would have stayed so silent, and especially when he's trying to perhaps forge closer ties with the EU, that might cause a bit of problems with Donald Trump.
Yeah, he's going to perhaps have to choose at one point, certainly. Well, there you have it. A pretty... When it comes to number 10, they'll think job done so far, but they have got that news conference still to come. It was due to start an hour ago. It's been delayed, as these things always are, but we are hearing there's a bit of movement, so don't go anywhere, because we are expecting it to be live on Sky News very, very shortly. As always with Donald Trump, it's going to be unpredictable and it's going to be lively.